All right, welcome everyone. So people are just starting to join us. We've got a great speaker today, Stephanie Stoutamire, who's joining us from the University of Florida. And as you're coming in, if you can just share your name and where you're from in the chat, and that gives us an idea of who's joining us today. Okay, and I'll also add where we're from.
Here's my chat.
Welcome, Marnie. Welcome, Sarah and Laura. And welcome, Samantha. Okay, we've got folks from Indian River County. We've got someone from Tallahassee, from Winnipeg. We've got someone from Ormond Beach, someone joining us from Ontario, Canada, which is amazing.
Yeah,
Awesome. Yes, I love to see all the diversity of where people are coming from joining us for these chats. It's really great, and I think it adds a lot of richness to the discussion later.
I
Um,
should have put some snowy pictures in my presentation.
yeah. Welcome, Mary Ellen. Welcome, Karen. All right, so we are right at 12:30. So I'm gonna go ahead and maybe get us going. So we're not, so we have the maximum amount of time to spend with Stephanie. Okay, so let me go ahead and share here. All right, and if you will all just give me maybe like a thumbs up, are you seeing my presentation? Okay, perfect. All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Stephanie Cadaval, and I am the Urban Forestry Extension Coordinator here at UF at the University of Florida. And we're based out of the School of Forest, Fisheries, and Geomatic Sciences. And I would love to thank you all for joining us for our Urban Forestry Extension Council Speaker Series event. We just kind of looked around the room here, looked at our chat, and we have folks from around the state of Florida joining us today, which is really cool, and also from other places in the country and from Canada as well, which is wonderful. And our event is formatted as a lunch and learn, so you're going to hear from our invited speaker, and then we have a little bit of time at the end to kind of engage in like a more casual conversation with them and with each other about the topic that we just learned about. This can be a little bit more casual than your typical presentation, and we do encourage you to bring and eat your lunch if you'd like. We do try to keep this around lunchtime. And I'll ask as you listen to the speaker if you have any questions for them, if you could just put them in the chat, and I'll keep track of them, and then we can address them like towards the end in like our questions and conversations part of the talk. Our speaker might have some questions for you all as she's presenting. So if she's, asking for engagement, of course, you're welcome to engage with them at that time. I'll also be recording this presentation to share it later on our website. And at the end, I'll share that information of where you can find our presentation today and also our previous presentations from the series. This is a pretty new series, so it's important for us to collect some feedback from all of you. So at the end of the event, we'll try to leave about maybe 5 minutes or so to wrap up, and I'll share with you all a QR code with a 3-question survey that's just going to help us learn about your experience with the event today, and that's just going to help us shape future events like this one. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker. So today we've got Stephanie Stoutamire joining us. And Stephanie is a PhD candidate in agricultural communication, education and communication here at the University of Florida. And she studies ways to reconnect people to nature and the benefits of nature connections, especially for the indoor generation. She tells us how this group lacks access and experiences disconnection from the natural world and gets us to think about what those experiences beyond the educational ones are that help foster connection to nature. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. I really appreciate that introduction. I sound so professional. And my little professional picture there. So thank you for sharing that for me. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen, get that going here. All right. So, yes, my name is Stephanie Stoutamire. I'll be finishing up my PhD next semester and then hopefully actually joining the extension community. I really, really love extension. I love getting out there and helping the community and especially like kids. And yeah, nature connection obviously is sort of my theme of my research. So I'm going to talk today about how urban forests are a really important way, a really important resource for people in a much bigger way than we kind of might think about offhand as far as like ecosystem services and things. They're extremely valuable to getting us the nature time that humans need in our lives. So I can get my little, okay, wants me to use that screen. All right. So I'm going to touch on nature connection and just kind of what that is, some of the benefits that we get from nature connection. My dissertation has elements to it about young adults exploring urban forest. I had them kind of go on to, or they could go on, engage in either of the bat houses on UF campus, which is a really awesome urban forest location because we've got the bats there and there's like a little garden area and the lake across the street, but there's still a street and traffic and people. And so it's very like a mixed environment. And then they also explored some nature trails on campus. And then we'll kind of dip into how we can foster nature connection. So I don't know if y'all have read of any of Susan Clayton's work, but she is definitely someone that inspired me a lot in this field. And I'm going to just take from her the definition of nature connection that she uses, which is the degree to which people feel part of the natural environment and actually incorporate that into their self concept. So she did a lot of work on environmental identity as it relates to environmental stewardship. And so that's kind of a little bit more from her, but we won't really touch on that. So so the way that nature connection how we relate to it, there's really three components. So there's an identity component of, do we see ourselves as a part of the natural environment? And there's all of these have different, it's on a spectrum. A cognitive component of recognizing that there's actually this relationship between nature, and nature is something that we impact it impacts us. There's an interplay. It's a dance between us and nature. It's not just a piece of furniture in our home or something that we only impact. And then there's an emotional bond aspect of nature connection where we actually feel a sense of belonging to nature. We feel a part of it and we have this attachment to it. And then I'm fine if anybody wants me to elaborate on anything, you can pipe up and or ask questions as we go too. So some of the benefits of having a connection to nature, so there's tons of studies out there where they've correlated, time in nature, strength of nature connection. There's different scales that they'll use to like assess someone's level of connection. And they've shown positive correlations between that and then environmental stewardship, overall well-being, and positive youth development. These are just a few that I really focus on. And so as far as stewardship goes, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, we tend to protect what we love. We care for, things that we have to know something first to want to like care for it from an intrinsic way and not legislation, not, lawmaking to have us care for something. And there's a lot of research that suggests, positive experiences in nature are really what then build that deep connection to nature. These are memories from childhood, sense of overcoming something, like hiking a mountain or excitement, discovery, all sorts of positive experiences. The research, Chawla is the researcher who's dived into this a lot. Talks about, a lot of our educational programs that try to foster environmental stewardship will focus on like educating people about, you know, the ecosystem of the trees or the role, more like sciencey stuff. They'll kind of focus on educating the actual like what nature is, but that doesn't necessarily lead people to love it. It's actually more so having these positive experiences. Now, of course, educational programs can lead to very positive experiences, but really focusing in on making sure that this is a positive thing will lead to more connection. Um, Nature connection is connected to our mental health, positive and negative emotions, improved learning outcomes when you're exposed to nature, like having just a view out a window can improve your focus, and then even social cohesion. So nature is something that all humans are wired to respond to it. It's something that we can all bond over. It's really should not be like something that there's different groupish behavior over it. It is something that can actually bring people together. And then one of the biggest things associated with positive youth development, which I've just PYD here, is for children, especially prior to the age of 8, is really when they're like setting in their sense of identity. And playing in nature is a great way to facilitate identity and having a strong one. So there's 3 essential components to our identity that all are very like highlighted in nature. So relatedness, feeling like we're connected to something bigger. We are not an outsider here. Autonomy. So this feeling that we actually have some power over our lives and can dictate like what we do. If you think about a lot of indoor spaces or places that are very like have a lot heavily influenced by humans, there's so many rules, there's so many norms. I mean, there's rules associated with just safety, of course, like crossing a street and things like that. But you're not running and playing and jumping inside or not being loud inside. These are all things that when kids are outside, they don't have so many rules on them and they can really kind of discover who they are. And then, of course, being outside in nature really tests your competence, being out there in the elements, like this kind of good stress that we can be exposed to outside, as far as just the elements that we're exposed to, but also figuring stuff out of like, I want to build a fort. Let me like build, find right size branches. And there's just a lot of creation that can happen fully just from your own imagination outside. And so with these 3 pieces, you can kind of like children before 8, they say it's like unstructured and as to a certain degree unsupervised play is it really helps children learn who they are, which I think as we kind of like move into our social media world and where everyone's can be really influenced easily, it's important that our children grow up with a strong sense of identity so that they're not just going to follow any bad idea. We want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, and be ostracized from their social group if they have to, which again is all related to them feeling mentally capable and that they're related to something beyond the social group. They're related to bigger things as well. So that's what really inspires me. Very passionate about reconnecting kids to nature, and kids really are needing daily exposure to nature, which is something that we are going to be able to provide through our urban forests because most people now are living in developed areas. More and more people are moving into like shared housing type places like duplexes or townhouses where their private yard space is getting smaller and smaller. And that, if you think about when you were a kid, if anybody's, older than like probably like 30-ish or so, like we spend a lot of time outside, not dealing like not indoors. And at least for me personally, that was a lot of it in my, I was fortunate enough to have a personal yard. And so safety wasn't as much of an issue that in our more developed areas, like if we're going to parks and things, like safety is a concern, like any public place. You're always going to be concerned about your children. So there are a handful of theories out there that really kind of like support why being in a forested area would actually like benefit us. I'm kind of switching now to a bit more of like the mental health aspect of things because that's what we have like a lot of like actual physical measurable data about, blood pressure decrease, like cortisol decrease, things like that. And it all kind of comes back from this like evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biological perspective of humans have always needed to be very aware of nature. For our survival, we've had to be able to read the natural world around us that requires us to be very close with it. We're cognitively aware of it, emotionally connected to it. And so this idea of biophilia is that we have this we're innately drawn to nature, and then we're biologically wired to actually have these physical responses to different types of nature experiences. Um, I'm going to jump down to the stress reduction theory down there. And that one is like very in line with this to where when we like, so think about, our ancestor, we know way back when, viewing a resource rich environment would have signaled safety and food and shelter. And so we could actually relax. And so our cortisol would decrease, blood pressure, things like stress signals would decrease and increase positive emotions because we now have resources. And even though we live in this modern world, we still seem to have that same feeling. I mean, think about when you go to like one of the springs around here or any beautiful like forested area, mountain vista. I mean, you just feel so relaxed a lot of times. And related to is attention restoration theory. And this is the same thing that we're very overstimulated. We're overstimulated in our homes, we're overstimulated everywhere else too, and so getting to a more natural environment can really give our minds the time it needs to actually decompress from the constant stimulation we are exposed to. I mean, even just, I don't know about y'all, but the whirring sound of my Wi-Fi router gets to me sometime, and I'm like, oh, can I just have real silence for a minute, and you can't really get that in this indoor space. um, And kind of like bringing that all together is this idea of restorative environments, which is that nature is providing us something like different from our daily life. It has to be something separate from our like work obligations. And, this theory kind of like touches on, so why do people feel good when they go to a desert? Because a desert obviously is not necessarily resource rich offhand, but it's still a very obviously going to let us decompress from overstimulation, and then it's different from our daily lives. And then kind of to that point too, like a forester might not feel as much of relaxation going on a hike, but we would choose maybe then to like go to a beach or something like that, maybe to where they don't actually feel like they're still at work. Um, so getting into my dissertation a little bit, I had a couple of groups of students here from UF. This group I call Nature Curious, just because my other group are the like kind of hardcore nature lover kids. But this group I had actually participate in going to one of these places on campus, either the bat houses or it's called Natural Area Teaching Lab Trails, but they're basically some little small loop trails around like kind of there's a bit of like a swampy area, a bit of like a grassy area too. It's a pretty neat place, but they're both very much like, urban forests. They've got so much like urban area around them, but yet they're still I'll tell you the results in a moment. But anyways, so I actually divided my group into two groups. I wish I had a bigger sample, but this was kind of just serving as a pilot to see if there's reason to kind of do this at a larger scale, more like an experiment. And one group, I had them watch a video that basically told them everything I just told you. I didn't make it. It's a YouTube video that kind of runs through the benefits of being in nature. And they watched that video, and then they went and engaged in their nature activity. And then the other group did not engage or did not watch the video before they engaged in the activity. And I really wasn't expecting much difference between the two groups. It was just kind of an idea I had of like, can this serve as like a placebo effect? Like, if people knew about all these benefits, would it, one, motivate them to engage in more of these activities? And then two, would it actually like make the impact stronger? Like, would they feel even more benefit because I told them basically that they're going to feel better after this? And there does seem to be a few things that point to a bit of a difference. After they participated in the activity, I had both groups complete the same survey, and one part of the survey had a free list exercise in it, which is set up for them just to basically write like one word items down in a list. Every single person who did not watch the video did just that. They had their one item listed. Well, 4 of my 6 participants who watched the video, even though they had the same set of instructions, they wrote like full sentences and paragraphs out. And so in that, I'm kind of thinking like, maybe they did elaborate a bit more, or like maybe they did just engage more with the nature around them, but I'm not sure. And then there was a bit of a difference in the responses too. The program group was a little higher and saying yes, they found themselves smiling, and that they only thought about the activity when doing the activity. And then this was like probably my biggest difference. So I used a psychometric instrument called the Positive and Negative Affect Score, which is called PANAS. And they did this it basically measures different things like feeling calm, feeling focused, feeling like irritated, just there's 20 different points on here. Looking at this graph, so my no program group, this is their pre-positive emotion score was 34, negative, so average was 22. Oh, I think I actually have these labeled wrong, so I'm so sorry about that. But basically so our program group, their positive emotions improved by 11.7. These parts are right. And the negative emotions improved by 14. And then here, my program group, negative emotion only improved by 7. So it suggests a little bit that some difference in kind of inoculating them with like a placebo effect. But we're just going to breeze past that since there's so many mistakes on it. This is just kind of a picture of the bat houses here on the left. So you can kind of see the type of urban forest setup it was. And then on the right here are the map of where the teaching lab trails are. And there's lots of different buildings and things intermixed there. But what I wanted to kind of point out is like, even with all of this, human influence around, I mean, I've been to these bat houses and there's a good bit of traffic that can drive past there. They all still got that big increase in their positive and negative affect scores, or big improvement in the things we wanted them to improve on. So it just really shows that urban forests are an incredibly valuable resource that I think, we don't have, like, people don't have to drive 30 minutes, an hour, even further out to be like a state park or to be fully out of town to get these benefits and to feel more relaxed. You can get them just right here in town, right here on campus. Um, these are just some of the things that the students really enjoyed about the activity. They enjoyed looking at the wildlife, a moment for self-reflection, feeling immersed. That was a big thing that came out in their free list, is just feeling immersed in green and sky. And then social and sense of community came up. I think that's probably at the bat houses, because it's something where, every evening, right before, I guess right around dusk, when the bats come out, a bunch of students will go out there and convene and watch them. And it's a pretty special moment. And again, like, no one's out there thinking, am I standing next to someone with a different political or religious affiliation than me? I mean, they're all just sharing in the moment together, which kind of harkens back to that social cohesion that nature can really bring us. Things they didn't like. Obviously, we've got the bugs and the heat on here, and we can't do a whole lot about that. But some of these other things we can do to make our urban forest be even more restorative for people. So one of the things that they didn't like were like loud people talking on cell phones, was the sound of like engines, trash, or the visibility of trash, and then dangerous animals. And I think that's a point that kind of came up where they're uncomfortable around them, and it's a reason why they don't venture out into nature. But that's something that we can definitely teach people about. We can certainly teach people how to feel more comfortable dealing with dangerous animals or avoiding them. Okay. So I'm going to jump into kind of the different types of activities that we can do to like foster a nature connection. I wanted to just see if they're oh, is my presentation not coming through correctly? I just noticed these
It
here.
is. It is.
Okay,
It's okay.
okay, perfect. Any questions on what we've talked about so far that anyone wants me to touch on before we move on? Okay. So, okay. So, in order to foster nature connection, we need to kind of talk about some of the things that are preventing it. So, we've got, and these are all things like from the literature, but they're also pretty, I think, like intuitive. So, one of the big things today is kids aren't bored. A big reason why youth of earlier generations would venture outside and explore and create different games is because they were bored. And now all of that stuff, we've got so many things to constantly keep kids busy and learning constantly, and they're socializing online. So that's one thing that's caused this disconnect. Another big issue is safety. Back in the 80s, stranger danger became a very real sense in this country. And you could kind of like look at trends back then. And that's when it almost seems like people started like pulling back a little bit of the freedom that children had. So, I think back to my childhood. So I'm 38. I was born in 1987, and we grew up with like a very, safe neighborhood. It was a big neighborhood, but all of the kids would kind of like get together and just rule the neighborhood. We would be going into other parents' homes all the time. And that's just not necessarily the case anymore. There's a lot more fear today of strangers, of neighbors, of a lot more fear of, kids being victim to, horrible things. Unfortunately, the reality is your kids, I think, I don't want to say the percentage. It's significantly more likely your child's going to run into that kind of trouble actually online these days. And so actually online is far more dangerous for kids when you think about predators in that way than playing outside. But there's also just the typical danger of breaking a leg, getting hurt just physically from playing outside. But taking risk is actually a really important part of child development as well. And then there's also an issue of a lot, and this is something like more prevalent in urban areas are that places that would be for children to connect with nature, to explore a little bit. Sometimes like they've are also occupied by adults, not parents, but we've got populations who don't have homes, or people who tend to they might just hang out in the park, and so that's another reason why parents don't want to either send their kids there alone, or even take them there to like free play in that area. um, Safety is also related to access, because like if the park that's meant to be the neighborhood park for that community is occupied by adults at any point in time, it's really becomes a less safe and a less accessible place for the children to play. So if, like, for instance, even if adults aren't at the park, during the daytime, parents don't want to send their children there when they've maybe been hanging out there the night before because of like different trash they might find in the place. You just never know these days. And so parents won't send their kids there. And then, of course, there's time, finances, and places being overcrowded. And these are things that I think can all be rectified with a lot more focus on developing natural spaces in urban areas, and then also maintaining those places for children. And I would definitely advocate for policies that restrict adults from hanging out in green spaces that are meant for children. And the last thing on here that becomes a large barrier for people is knowledge. And again, this isn't knowledge about the science of forest. It's knowledge about how can I safely recreate in this place. That was something that, so people have to feel comfortable. They're not going to get stress relief from going on a nature hike if if they don't know how to like prepare for the hike. Like, do they go in the hottest time of the day, or do they not wear bug spray? Do they have, sunglasses and covering and things like that? So a lot of people just avoid going because they don't know how to do it. And this was actually something that came up in the other group of students I worked with in my dissertation, my nature lover group. Two of those students were from the Midwest and were avid outdoorsmen in the Midwest, but then coming here to Florida, it's a completely different environment. And they do not feel comfortable going out and exploring the woods and doing this, that, and the other because they don't know about, I mean, for them, it was different things like snakes and alligators and bears. And so there is a knowledge that needs to be passed along on how to recreate in nature. And those are things that I think that extension agents and just people, urban forestry people, can kind of like keep these things in mind as they're working on different things in your communities. So there's all different types of nature interaction and engagement. So we've got, and then based on the type of interaction, they have kind of like varying levels of impact on forming that sense of connection with nature. A lot of times the impact is going to be kind of heightened if we can pull on that emotional or even that like cognitive engagement part of being in nature. But just kind of like going down the list here. So intentional or direct, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. So like actually purposefully going out into nature and doing a nature hike is going to lead to more connection than a hike you have to take every day to walk to the bus stop, for instance. So I'm going to skip this one and come back to it. Guided versus self-directed. These are, again, these two are going to be a little bit per person. It'll depend on if they have comfort in nature or not. But a lot of times if someone is comfortable in nature, they're going to get a little more benefit from self-direction. Certainly, children within a safe, confined place having self-directed exploration of an urban forested area would probably get more to that identity development than a guided exploration. Solo versus social. So there's a lot of benefit to either one of these. So a social interaction in nature can kind of build positive memories that are also then connected to a person's like family or something. I think it's called place attachment theory. It's sort of connected to the social part as well, where you actually become like really connected to like a park where you and your family would have social gatherings or celebrate all your birthdays and stuff. You actually feel like that place is a part of you as well. And so, of course, you'll do a lot to stand up for it or advocate for it if it came to be threatened. Real life versus virtual. Virtual does have some impact on like forming like these positive experiences, but of course, real life is going to be it all day long. Wild and domesticated. So this is like your big outdoor, hike out west or something, a very non-human influenced wild nature versus domesticated, which is typically our urban forests are going to be a bit more domesticated. Both of them are going to have good impacts on nature connection. However, the caveat of that is things like crowded areas or noise pollution, or a lot of like light pollution if you're trying to enjoy something outdoor can definitely dampen the experience in a more domesticated nature environment. And then observing versus interacting. Again, kind of going to, if you think about observing of being more like at a zoo, which again has so many valuable benefits. A lot of the students brought up just observing the different insects like react or landing on plants was really neat for them. But of course, if you can go feed the giraffe and actually interact with the giraffe, you might have a little bit more of a positive experience there, unless a giraffe bites you or something. And then the appreciative, consumptive, and mechanized types of engagement. So appreciative is like bird watching, just, hiking, just going out to view nature for nature's sake. Consumptive is like hunting, fishing, or gardening. And then mechanized are like ATV rides or I guess, yeah, mostly like ATV or like something motorized. And actually, surprisingly, the study, I only have one study that really dives into this, but their findings were that people who engaged in appreciative and consumptive activities had the highest environmental identity. And then next were our appreciative group. So just can't hate on our hunters. They love it too, I guess. Okay, so now I kind of just wanted to talk about some ideas. So like now that we know a little bit about nature connection, we can definitely get this value of our mental health benefits from urban forest. And yeah, so I wanted to kind of, if you guys had any ideas on things that you would be able to do in some of your communities, or I have some ideas here too, like, so engaging mentally with nature is something that can help build connection. And so even like a really small area of forest with like a lot of different diverse plants in the space can increase that sense of connection or just sense of like discovery and exploration and fun. Other ideas I had were kind of like arranging some safe park days, perhaps. And then maybe some more like outdoor education that's about like teaching people how to interact with outdoor areas. Um, neighborhoods, I think, are an area where, like, if anyone's working on policy related things, we've got to quit bulldozing neighborhoods. That's a huge, huge, huge resource that's being lost for children, and losing out on all these benefits that having some nice nature area, very accessible, that can be kept safe because it's part of your own area is important. Um, and then I have some kind of like talking questions here of different activities that you would have in your neighborhood that perhaps people could engage in. Um, or also, how can city parks incorporate more wilderness areas? Could be a fun one. So many parks these days like don't have a lot of variance in their vegetation. A lot of them look like this one in the bottom left here. When we could, maybe formulate some more natural style parks for kids to explore and play in. But that is my presentation resources here. But yeah, if you guys have any questions or ideas or want to talk about, when you were a kid, what were some of your favorite things you remember doing in nature?
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. I think that's a great place to kind of start, like thinking about this idea, right? So maybe like if folks from the group can kind of think about this question you just posed, right? What were some of those moments that you spent in nature that really like kind of sparked your connection with nature? Oh, and then Mary Ellen would like to know if you can go ahead and put that resources slide up again, just so folks can see it. Maybe folks want to take a screenshot of this.
The book I have pictured there is Susan Clayton's book, and she's compiled. It's a compilation of different writings and studies that have been done, and it's very like inspirational. And I think something that I just like recently thought about. I guess it was a commercial for something talking about lab grown meat and it being like better for the environment. And I'm like, yeah, but then we're losing like cows and farms, and there's this value that we can't measure. And yes, there's a carbon footprint to that, but there's also this value of like inspiring a next generation of nature lovers. Like we need to still have some nature around for them to continue loving it. And I remember I had a friend in like elementary school, and she was terrified of every animal except cows. It was the only animal she liked, and I would hate for her to not have cows anymore.
Yeah, so we've actually got some examples that people have put in the chat stuff. So
Cool.
Georgina is saying, she used to go into the hay fields near her grandparents' house
Mhm.
with her brothers, and they would make houses by beating down the grasses and making rooms.
I love that.
And then Felicia mentions kayaking through the mangroves. Sam is
Mhm.
saying climbing trees as a kid or visiting specific trees, making forts in the forest, and visiting state parks.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and these are great things that like children today, they're not having the same opportunity as us that we got to have. And so anything we can do to facilitate these same experiences would be really great.
yeah. Listening to what other folks have said is like their kind of like moment that sparked their connection. Here, there's another one here.
I
It's a
hear
good one.
too.
This person's parents were both zookeepers, so they got to see some behind the scenes experiences with wildlife. Like definitely, I can understand that. I used to work at a zoo, and I wasn't working directly with animals at the zoo, but I did get to work with a lot of people that did, and seeing some of those things firsthand, that really connected me, I think, with a lot of not just the wildlife, but the habitats that they came from, and what made me want to learn more about those things.
Hmm.
But your presentation, Stephanie, made me wonder, like, it's not just about having lots of places to go, but also having like really quality places to
Yeah.
go.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that, or maybe if folks in the group have some ideas about that, like what makes like a quality place, like a quality nature place to visit?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. I mean, I think views are really important, and like so having as many nature views rather than like so obstruct, hiding as much of like the building that's maybe surrounding the green space as possible. Um, I think noise has come up a lot in other studies of like what people don't like about when they maybe go to a nature place or to engage to a park or noise and um, crowds, and so that's one thing with like having many nice locations is to disperse, people a bit more. So it's not all just in some of our like main parks or something.
Yeah, that also makes me think about like the role of design, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a lot of experience with this, but maybe some folks in the group do, and how design can kind of like shape the way that we interact with some of these spaces, and like some of the choices that we make for what is in the space makes a difference in how people interact or engage with the space.
Mm-hmm. The comment in here about the small patch of healthy forests and the subdivision, I mean that's huge right there and related to planning. And that's, an area that I think maybe if more realization, if everyone really like was more aware of just how critical nature was like positive youth development, I think, and also to these. I mean, we're in a huge mental health crisis, and our youth and young people, and probably even adults as well. But it's incredibly alarming what's happening in young people's mental health these days. And I do think that even the big bad developers, might have a little bit more like of a heart if we're like, no, like our kids need a small patch of forest to play in, So I do think that some movement can be made towards policies related to planning and especially like when you're developing where people live. I think there needs to be a lot more focus on urban forestry and maybe pulling in some of the big guns from like public health. I mean, this is really a mental health, public health crisis. And so I don't think there's any shortage of persuasion that you could have with a range of people. It's also incredibly related to equity, like when you have learning outcomes tied to nature connection, and then we see kids in urban areas falling short in learning outcomes. We're just doubling down on how unfair it is to people to not have access to healthy and relaxing nature.
Yeah, we've got quite a few comments in
Mm-hmm.
the chat. So Daphna's mentioning that tree protection ordinances are a great tool.
Mm-hmm.
And Georgina is mentioning how people can be very quick to dismiss urban nature or think of it as being unsafe or unruly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wonder, do other folks in the group have a similar experience with that? Like, how are you all experiencing people's, I guess, perspectives about urban nature in your own communities?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Daphna's mentioning in the chat, I think a lot of it is also related to how degraded most urban nature is. So again, maybe this is the idea about like quality spaces, right? Overrun
Mm-hmm.
with invasives, difficult to enjoy.
Yeah. I read, one of the things from age like this happened a long time ago. They started actually taking away a lot of the brushy parts of city parks, especially, and I think this began in New York City because unfortunately bad stuff was happening, with like women walking past a little park area and there were too many places to hide, and for unwanted things to be happening. And so that kind of led to the clearing up of the parks so that there wasn't so many like unobscured places for bad things to happen, but then they've ended up kind of sterilizing them to where they're not. I mean, they're certainly not serving any function to the ecosystem, but also not to the children.
Um, Mary Ellen is mentioning about like people's concerns when they're going into these spaces. And this is something that you talked about in your presentation too, right? So how do we like build comfort in nature? And it got me kind of thinking as you were talking about this, I was like, maybe there is a different way that we can integrate how we teach people about nature that's related to this. So, Mary Ellen, your comment kind of makes me think of this, right? People being worried about snakes. Like maybe that is kind of like an opportunity where like this is a place where we can teach people about the role of snakes in this particular habitat or something like that. And that kind of connects to that idea of like helping to build comfort in nature by talking about like why this is the way it is or why the snake plays a role or how to avoid maybe having encounters with snakes that could be dangerous.
I think I think that's really where it comes down to is like that part of how can we like you need to know enough about the snake's lifestyle and like patterns to avoid, going to areas and like, stopping your feet or something and listening for rattles and all those things. But I find that most, at least in the when reading about why people aren't engaging in nature, it's they don't feel safe, and for a number of ways. But yeah, I think definitely teaching them how to avoid snakes is a good thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of activity right now in the chat, so I'm trying to make sure that I'm
No,
catching
just keep on
everyone's
going with the chat.
comments.
Yeah, I'm in the chat too here.
So Sam is talking about how here within the city of Gainesville, folks will ask for a conservation area to be cleaned up. And so what they're asking for in reality is they're talking about like all of the native plants that are there in all different stages of their life. And maybe not making that connection of like this is what a natural area is supposed to look like.
Yeah,
Is that what
yeah.
you mean by that, Sam?
I love this summer camp thing.
Oh yes, Felicia. I would love to attend a summer camp for adults. That
Yeah.
sounds amazing. So Felicia is talking about this idea of a summer camp for adults designed to connect people with nature and just feel like a kid again. Um,
Well,
that's really cool. I wonder, Stephanie, if you've heard about things like that in some of the
um,
research that you've looked at.
I haven't come across it directly, but I will say the getting to the adults is really, really important because the love of nature is established mostly in childhood. If we have adults today that are not going to raise their kids outside, we might really risk like losing a whole lot of generational experience. And so I definitely think tackling the adults, getting them into these summer camp things would be a great way to have them understand how important nature is for their families moving forward. So totally fun.
Yeah. Here's another comment similar to what Sam was talking about and the comment earlier about the snakes. A lot of people probably care, but they don't know what it really looks like for an area ecologically, like ecological composition wise. And so they're not making that connection of how to take care of it, and it becomes like perceived as being unruly or unsafe due to things like exotics, exotics, or pollution.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe people have kind of a different perspective about what nature should look like.
Yeah, and I've definitely come across that. I think it's called like the English yard or the European yard or something that kind of came over here, which is that completely like what's deemed attractive is that mowed grass, everything like neat and tidy. And I think that that is something that slowly culturally would be great to change is just this idea of a native landscape. And hopefully our stewards will be tackling some of these issues that have been brought up here.
Yeah, I had a question, Stephanie. You talked about different kinds of engagement.
Hmm.
And one of the things that you showed was real life versus virtual.
Hmm.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what some of the ways that virtual engagement can have positive impacts on nature connection. And are there instances where this could be appropriate or maybe could be combined with real life engagement?
So I have not read a lot about the virtual engagement. Now, what I have read about it is talking about like nature documentaries and things like that. And so that can really help to like inspire people. It can, help to teach people about like we were talking about earlier, like the role that snakes have. And so there is a place where documentaries and nature education helps inspire the actual to get out into the real life. Now, I would imagine a lot of these like virtual reality things can kind of get even a step further than that. But part of what experiencing nature is, it's like a full physical experience, it's like the feeling. We've got all of our senses engaged. You can smell, we can hear, we can maybe taste stuff, we can hear things. And so I don't think that anything virtual is ever going to compare to the real deal just because it's not going to activate all of those senses, which is important for like memory formation. Um, yeah, basically memory formation.
Yeah. I wonder if anyone else in the group has any questions for Stephanie or for others in the group about any of these topics. Maybe you have some experiences that you want to share, like from your own communities.
Oh, I see. So, I'm a crazy nature fanatic. I had a really, really fortunate childhood, and my family was really into nature, and um, I don't think I'd be here probably honestly if it weren't for the mental health I get from going hiking and experiencing it. And I just I feel really like sad for people who don't get to experience like all the wonderful feelings we get from nature. And so it just kind of made me want to try to help people get back out there and bring it more to the forefront of the public conversation. And I think nature connection is loss of nature time is one of the biggest issues we're facing and connected to a lot of our other issues. Thank you for asking.
So, Stephanie, since we're recording, I just want to make sure I read out loud the question that you just answered. So, you
Oh,
were answering the question, what drew you to this work?
yes. Sorry, y'all.
And then we have two questions in the chat that I want to address before we kind of wrap up. So Georgina wants to know, they're curious if anyone has experienced any pushback against installing lighting in urban natural areas.
I don't have anything specific to talk about on that point. I will say personally, the dimmer the light, the better for star viewing. I also got to grow up in a place where I could see stars, and here in a neighborhood I could see stars, and I don't get to see them here as much where I'm living, and I do miss them. And then there was another question, any potential connection between increasing interest of community and homeschooling? Yeah, I mean, I think that homeschooling is a great, I mean, that's another area that I feel like needs to kind of come on board because so many kids, their only opportunity to play outside in a safe area is going to be at school. And so I do think that school and nature need to be much more aligned. And we do a lot of learning from nature as well. Like it teaches us so much about life.
Yeah. And I just want to put in before we wrap up, there was some questions about this idea of social cohesion and how people view some of these nature spaces differently.
Mm-hmm.
There's an article that was done by some folks here at UF that I just dropped into the chat. The article is called Factors That Enhance or Hinder Social Cohesion in Urban Green Spaces. It's a literature
Yeah.
review and it does talk about this a little bit. So I just wanted to note that I put that in the chat for folks to look at as well. With that, I want to say thank you so much to Stephanie. I'm just going to go ahead and share my slides here again.
Oh yeah, I'm stop
Okay.
sharing.
So I think you're all looking at the slide with Stephanie's presentation title on it. So I just want to thank you so much again, Stephanie, for sharing that topic with us. There's a lot of great conversation that's been had in the chat and outside of the chat. And I'm really glad to see how much people have engaged with this topic. And with that, next time we all see each other again for our next speaker, we're also going to continue this idea about engaging youth in urban forestry. And we're going to be speaking with Ali Bell, who is the education director for the nonprofit organization Canopy from California. And they're going to be talking to us about teen urban foresters and how to engage young folks in urban forestry. And then with that, I want to just kind of wrap up by reminding you all that this presentation recording is going to be on our School of Forest, Fisheries, and Geomatic Sciences YouTube page. And you can find that by clicking or scanning the QR code here. And then finally, if you would all please take a moment and just fill out our quick feedback survey. It's, I think, maybe 3 questions total. And that really helps to show us what works with this speaker series, what hasn't worked, and that will help us also put together future speaker series, which we hope to do. So thank you again, everyone, so much for your amazing questions. Thank you, Stephanie, so much for sharing your work and your experiences with us.
You're
And with
welcome. Thank
that,
you.
I just want to say thanks to everyone, and I'll stop recording.